Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Today, I am chatting with Angela from This Gathered Nest. If you're over on YouTube or Instagram and you're in the homeschool world or the just mom world, you probably know her. We are going to chat about, well, all things homeschool, but kind of in a maybe unconventional way. I don't know. We go on a lot of different tangents, so it's two friends chatting about mom life, really. All right, join me for the interview. My name is Lisa, mother of 7 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. Join me as I share with you my love for creating a handmade home from scratch cooking and a little mom and entrepreneur life along the way. All right. Well, hey, Angela. Glad to have you on. It's been a while since we've chatted.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about homeschool. We can start with some introductions for those who don't know you. I think a lot of people in the listeners probably do. You and I have collaborated before, and then obviously we have like a very similar niche and group of people following us. But for those who don't know, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say, I know nothing about sourdough and you know everything about sourdough. So don't come to my channel and expect that because Lisa and I talk about the same things, you're going to learn anything about sourdough from me. Though I love to eat it, I don't know how to make it. But I am Angela and my YouTube channel is just, well, I have 2, but my main one that I'm using right now is just my Angela Braniff channel. And I make kind of all over the place content a little bit, but I just really like to talk about the things that interest me: motherhood, homemaking, homeschooling, and those kinds of topics.
Yeah. And you have 8 children ranging from high school down to preschool, correct? So that makes for quite a diverse age range for homeschool.
Yes. Yeah. My oldest she actually just turned 16 and I'm still emotionally and mentally dealing with that. And then my youngest is 3 and he's, about the size of a 16-year-old though. So that's a little strange to reckon with as well. So we've just kind of got, a little bit of everything, honestly, which is kind of, especially as it relates to homeschooling, an interesting and I don't know how unique it is. I feel like there's a lot of large homeschooling families, but it does give me a special insight into kind of all of the different categories of homeschooling over the years.
Yeah, because you also have like some that have special needs. You have some that probably learn at the whatever average normal pace, whatever that is. And so you just run like the whole deal here.
Yeah. And, I feel like over the years, that's also given me a special insight into and a heart for homeschooling moms, very specifically because we can tend to ostracize ourselves because we don't feel like we fit the mold or our kids don't fit the mold and feel like you have to do everything just how you see others doing it. Otherwise, it doesn't count or you're not doing it right or something like that. And I have had children that I was homeschooling while others of my kids were in a, public school, charter school environment. And trying to figure out, particularly with my kids with special needs, what is the right course of action for them, what's best for them, and not what is like going to hit my ego, and making decisions based on each kid and not on how I wish things to be, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or like which crowd you identify with or whatever.
Yes.
Like you just have to take it by each kid in some.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of special needs parents who also homeschool their kids. And that is right for some families. And for others, it's not. It's totally acceptable to decide to place a special needs child into a different schooling situation because while I fully believe that mothers are absolutely capable of educating their children and guiding them on their individual education journey, when you are dealing with a child that, there's lots of different terms, but, neurodivergent or really doesn't learn in the quote unquote typical way, it's going to often exceed your capabilities. and it's totally okay. And maybe you're just hearing me preach to myself right now, and I'm saying this because one of my kids went into a new school environment as of November of this past year. And actually, your podcast is the first place that I'm talking about it anywhere ever. I haven't shared about this at all yet. So breaking news exclusive in case anyone cares.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this is actually one of my son who doesn't have an outward disability. So it's not something that you see on the outside. Like my daughter with Down syndrome, you can look at her and know that she has a special need. But my son, his special needs that we're just kind of uncovering, peeling back the onion right now and learning about what's going on with him. And once you can push past the like disappointment, sadness, all these other feelings that are wrapped up in having to make decisions that maybe you didn't want to make. My intention was to never place him back into a different school environment. I really wanted to homeschool him, and it just hasn't worked. And so I've had to fight through my own feelings about this in order to do what's best for him. And that's been, something that it's just ever evolving. You do the best you can with the information that you have at the time.
Yeah. And that's the case with probably everything with raising 8 kids. It's such a wide range. You have, as your name suggests, this gathered nest, you have some that are adopted, some that are biological. And so there's just, there's a lot going on with your family that you've had to make a lot of adjustments over the years, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true of any family, no matter how your family's put together. You have to be flexible. You have to, be willing to kind of, our philosophy as far as homeschooling goes has always been that we evaluate every kid every year. I'm a little less that way now because my reasons for homeschooling have become a little bit more like set in stone. Mm-hmm. And I also have learned my kids well enough that I don't need to decide if homeschooling is right for them every single year. Unless something drastic has changed, then it's status quo at this point. Like we're still moving forward with it. But I gave myself that grace every year in the beginning to say, I think I did that so that I would know that I didn't have to commit to this forever to commit to it for 1 year, mm-hmm. because there's so much fear when you first start homeschooling. And, it's your confidence in anything you do as a mother, but as homeschooling as well. You have to build up that confidence like a muscle. And the more you use it, the more time that goes by, the more you get through, the more confident you become. And the less you need to fall back on that, like, it's all right, I'll just evaluate at the end of the year and decide if I still want to do this.
Maybe I won't.
You kind of can, you can kind of let that go at some point and be like, okay, I'm doing this. We're doing this. It's happening,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm totally in that spot right now. Like, well, there's not really much to evaluate, but I could see how in some situations that would be the case. And especially in the beginning, like it's almost like when you're first time nursing and if it's difficult, I've heard moms say, like, how long are you going to nurse? And they've said, just like right now I'm nursing. And that's like all I can tell you. Just to get through this, I'm just going to have to just say that I'm going to nurse this time and maybe next time I will too.
Oh, yeah. That nursing is definitely one of those things that it was really hard for me with my first because she was born preemie and just kind of like weak at it and never really took to it. And it was hard. And so with my second, I did that very same thing. Like, we're just going to see what happens. We'll just go with the flow. And next thing you know, she was 2 years old and still nursing. And I was like, all right, I'm kind of done now. Like, you've got a fork and a knife and steak. And like, I'm kind of done now. Like, don't come near me with those choppers. But yeah, you do. You kind of evaluate differently each time. And you give yourself like that safety net. And sometimes that's dangerous though, right? Because it's like this low expectation. And so we know that when we give our kids high expectations, they will rise to those occasions, right? We can call our kids up to be better, to be more successful, to do better. And sometimes in our effort to not be so hard on ourselves and not beat ourselves up, and we give ourselves these safety nets instead of calling ourselves to be better, to be more confident and to like fill those shoes and rise to the occasion instead of looking for the escape hatch all the time.
Yeah, I do see what you're saying there. That can also be like maybe this helps you to get through each year, or maybe it's just something to fall back on. But nonetheless, we got a ton of questions about the topic of homeschooling with multiple age groups because we put up a question box on Instagram. I think a lot of people recognize that you have some skill or at least experience in that arena. So, okay, with your little kids, do you include them or distract them when working with the older kids? And I'm sure like your oldest kids can pretty much homeschool themselves at this point. So that's probably another thing. But yeah, how does that work?
Yeah. So again, I hope it doesn't sound like I'm trying to dance around answers here at all, but it does look a little bit different depending on the ages and through time, right? Because remember that I have a 16-year-old and a 3-year-old. So now my 16-year-old can take my 3-year-old outside and go play with them because my oldest two are doing a lot of their schoolwork on their own time at their own pace. So that makes them more available to help me with younger ones. And I know that that's not everyone's situation. So I am going to kind of like revert back to answer this question for back when I had just a whole lot of smaller kids,
Mm-hmm,
a
right.
whole lot of kids that weren't as capable of being independent or helping and that kind of thing. So for me, the juggling act was, really a matter of evaluating what am I doing with each kid for each subject and at this time, and distracting the little ones for the amount of time I needed and being very realistic about what you're doing with those like older kids, depending on what grade they are, what age they are, and what you're doing with them is really going to dictate how much time you need, and being very realistic about that. Again, I think one of the biggest failures, or one of the things that homeschool moms inevitably make themselves feel like they're failing in, is having way too high of expectations of how much schoolwork their kids should be doing every day at different age levels. I think it can get toned back a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I have little like some extra kids here today right now, and so they're being. I'm not sure if I should go tell them like, hey, you need to be more quiet out there.
Yeah.
It's really
It's
really
joyfulness.
warm out here. Like it's just yeah, it's been very warm, and so everybody's outside, which is fine. But I'm in my little cottage, and I know you're probably in your little.
Yeah, I'm in my little cabin, but it's always cold where you are.
Oh yeah, it
Yeah.
should be freezing right now.
It's actually warm here too, but
Yeah, it's been warm like almost all winter. It's crazy, but anyways, hopefully they're not being too loud and distracting. Okay, so whenever you do have little kids in the mix, I guess thinking back to when it wasn't like when you didn't have 16 and 15-year-old girls, and you had, let's see here, maybe like a 9-year-old and then also like a 9-year-old that you had to really hands-on do school with, but then also like a 2-year-old. What are some of your tips for keeping little ones entertained while working with older siblings?
the beauty of the modern day and social media and everything is there are some really amazing accounts out there that like do the like busy tot things and ideas for that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. So if you are, I want to be clear because there's two categories here. If you are a crafty mom, go at it with all
Right.
of those like busy boxes and give your kids all of those. You can totally like mix those things up. And some moms are just really fantastic at that kind of stuff. I will be the first to tell you that I am not.
I'm
If
not
I'm
either.
going to distract my toddlers and you are going to make a giant mess, then that's just going to be a problem for me later.
Yeah.
So I just kind of was always like, how can I distract you with as little disaster to me as possible? So, I mean, again, like open-ended play things, lots of like, here's some Legos, here's some blocks, here's some, I mean, again, we don't get crazy. Here is some paper and some scissors cut, because I can just sweep that into the garbage later. Or, I'm not a big like Play-Doh person. Somebody ends up eating that and it's also very messy. But trying to find like little things like that And I try to have them be things that they don't have access to all the time to do. If I need them to be distracted, then this activity has to be exciting to you too. As the kid, you have to be like, ooh, this feels, special kind of a thing. Also, again, just depending on what it is, we live on a small farm, but even if you don't live on a small farm, going outside, it's amazing how much less needy kids are when they're outside. So even if you're sitting on the porch reading and doing something with an older kid, helping them with a handwriting thing, and little ones can be playing in the dirt or playing, that kind of thing. To me, those distractions are the ones that will be sufficient enough for me to get something done with a slightly older kid. Obviously, the use of nap time. This is where like the whole flexibility thing comes in, because you might need to save a really tough, if you've got a kid that just really struggles with reading and you need 30 minutes or an hour of like super undivided attention, then you might just have to wait till nap time. Up until really the last year or so, all of our kids have always had quiet time in the afternoons. Whether you are too old for a nap or not, you just go into your room, you sit in your bed, you read a book, not like electronics at that time, but like a book, or you can draw, or you can play very quietly in your bed, or with a small toy or something. But everybody needs to just rest their bodies and their mouths. And that's also a time when I can pluck out a specific child to work with as well. So it's kind of just knowing your family, knowing your routine, knowing your schedule, and figuring out where you can pull out those pockets of like intensity as you need them, but being very realistic with yourself about what that's going to look like, because there's just going to be no such thing as completely uninterrupted when you have a baby that needs to nurse or, something like that. I mean, I've so many times had a baby in my arms with a bottle or a boob in their mouth, whichever one. So my kids are adopted, some aren't. So it's like some had bottle, some had boob, but whatever they had, while I'm also over the shoulder of another kid, reading with them, helping them, with math facts, quizzing them on something. It is kind of this juggling, balancing act.
Yes. And you're on the other side of having kids who like can read and write and are almost graduated at this point. And so I think it's encouraging to hear that even when it doesn't look perfect, because I think a lot of times when people ask this question, because I get this question, anytime I put up a question box about homeschool, this is the number one question pretty much is like, well, how do you do older kids and younger kids? And I think they want like a really good solution from us, when in reality, it is kind of messy and there isn't this perfect solution. And it's always going to be a little bit chaotic. And like you said, you could do maybe some one-on-one reading practice after bedtime. I did that last night with one of my kids because there just wasn't a pocket of time throughout the day. He was involved in the other parts of school throughout the day, but like the one-on-one reading time that needs to happen for like 20, 30 minutes a day can't happen during those other times. So that you're on the other side of that, and the whole time there's been little kids, quote unquote, in the way of all of this, it still worked out for you. I think that can be pretty encouraging.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would remind moms too is that remember that the reason, well, maybe not the reason, but one of the reasons and one of the great benefits of homeschooling is the flexibility that it provides you. And there's no rule book. If you want to homeschool your kids in the evening when your spouse is home from work, or you know what I mean? There are homeschooling moms who work full time and they homeschool their kids in the evenings. There's not like it's after 6:30 p.m., which means you can't do any schoolwork. The weekends. I mean, there's been times that we've homeschooled. We don't just homeschool necessarily Monday through Friday. If things get crazy, or let's say like we have a really beautiful day when the weather's been really crappy and all of a sudden we have a beautiful day and it's like, it's Tuesday, but we're going to just go outside and play and have fun today. We might do schoolwork on Saturday when the rain comes back. And also you can also alternate days with kids. So you might be like, you know what, I'm going to do my littlest ones who need a lot of intensity, the stuff that I'm going to do with them on these 3 days. And then my older ones, just these two. That's how it is now for me, is that with my oldest two that are 16 and 14, so middle school and high school, they actually only work with me for a handful of hours, about 2 days a week. and everything else they're doing is independent. So those other days, I'm really able to just focus on the younger ones.
Yeah, once you've taught certain kids certain things, they can do a lot of it themselves. And so you're really, even though people picture like you having 8 kids all sit down at their desks homeschooling, in reality, you realize that there are certain kids who can totally, there's just only a couple kids almost always that need one-on-one attention at any given moment. And then there's always, like with the age ranges, there is a lot of flexibility in that. I think there was probably certain people, like I've definitely heard, have you ever been out and about during the day and had somebody be like, why aren't you in school? But a collective gasp from those type of people whenever you said, you could homeschool in the evening. Like, wait, what? You could, yes, it doesn't have to look how the conventional way does. If you accomplish the tasks that you need to accomplish, that this child is well educated, it doesn't matter what hours it happens in. And definitely also, I think people picture school happening like for 8 hours a day and it's school the entire time. And we all know that's not really the case. So it doesn't have to be like that for homeschoolers either.
No, absolutely. That's like the one thing that I wish I could. It's a lot of like what I talk about in my homeschooling course. What I try to encourage homeschool moms is that you have to like, you kind of have to tear down the castle, right? You have to break down all of your preconceived notions and beliefs about the public school system, why it was created, what was it intended for, how did we end up with our kids in school from 8 to 3 every day. And then really when you dive into understanding the average amount of time that is actually spent on school, like on education in that time frame, if your kids are at a public school, you can very quickly ease your mind and not feel like you realize how much more schooling your kids are getting in homeschool, even when you feel like they're not getting a lot, because it's just simply impossible for, a teacher to be able to give that same kind of one-on-one attention when they've got 22 students in a classroom and they've got lines to stand in and wait for this and wait for that and go to lunch and then recess and then this, a gym for spirit day or whatever. And I'm not knocking any of those things. I'm just saying that statistically speaking, kids are doing about an hour and a half of actual education in a day at school, at a public school environment or setting, particularly like in elementary school years. So if you're doing 2 hours of school a day with your kids, you're doing great. Do not beat yourself up.
Yeah. I think that's where moms start to doubt themselves, because you realize that with having multiple ages and having to cook dinner and do all the other things you have to do as a mom, you're like, wait, we're not schooling all day. And I'm depriving them, because if they were sent to school, they would be doing school all day. I think that's where, we definitely get into trouble mentally, where we think that we're not doing enough.
Yeah. And reframing what you're envisioning is education, remembering that it's more than rote memorization, and that likely your decision to homeschool your kids was based on wanting to also be shaping their character, their hearts, who they become, what they focus on, what do they want to be as they grow up, what do they want to do, allowing them in many ways to shape their own education, all of that, learning how to take care of their home and other, like all of that is part of the picture of education for your kids. It's not just the math worksheet and the spelling worksheet. That stuff is like, great, check that box and move on. There's so much else that encompasses why so many moms choose to homeschool and the things that they want to pass on to their kids, the knowledge, the experience, the life skills they want to pass on that will never fit inside a traditional school checkbox of like, well, we did this subject and this subject. That you have to learn to recognize as a homeschooling mom. You have to learn to see them and see the value in them so that you can weight them appropriately against the other things that you're feeling like you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I bet we never give ourselves any credit for certain things because they're not school, like they're doing something that's actually really valuable, but they wouldn't be a subject taught at school. And so we wouldn't count that as toward the hours when really, I like to think about what's my goal here? What am I trying to raise? What am I trying to like produce at age 18? And is like this leading toward that, at least, not, in a perfect way, but in at least directing them. And I'm like, okay, no, being around real life all day is definitely going to lead to this. So
Absolutely.
I can rest assured with that.
Uh-huh.
When you cook from scratch in your home, one thing that you might notice if you're new to this whole endeavor is that you need a lot of salt. Whether you are simmering bones for bone broth, you got to add a lot of salt to that because store-bought broths come with salt that make it delicious. You got to add your own. Whether you are making ferments like sauerkraut, where you need a tablespoon of quality salt for each head of cabbage. Sourdough, obviously you don't feed your starter with salt, but every recipe calls for salt. I have 20 grams in my 2-loaf recipe. We use a lot of salt in this family because it is good for you and none of our foods come pre-salted. Now, because I am trying to source quality meats, quality milk in our home, I take that very seriously. It's a priority. I also want to make sure that we are sourcing quality salt. That is why I love using Redmond Real Salt. I can trust that I am getting a high quality salt for all of my from scratch cooking, my ferments, my recipes. They all turn out beautiful with my Redmond salt. And one thing I really don't want to do is run out. How many times have you gone to just make a simple meal and it's all from scratch, so there's no added salt? You're out of salt. You almost have to run to the store for it. I have been buying bulk 10-pound bags of salt so that does not happen to me. We don't have to rebuy that very often, but it's so nice having a large stash of that in the pantry that we can often pull from and refill the jar that sits by our stovetop so that we never run out. Redmond Real Salt is offering Simple Farmhouse Life listeners a discount. It will be automatically applied when you go to the link bit.ly/Farmhouse Redmond. Again, bit.ly/Farmhouse Redmond. I just clicked that link to make sure that everything still worked with it. I added a 10-pound bag of salt to my cart and saw the discount. So make sure to head over to Redmond at bit.ly/Farmhouse Redmond. Get your discount and make sure that you never run out of high quality salt for your from scratch kitchen. Okay, the next set of questions have to do with curriculum. I get this a lot, I'm sure, since you have a homeschooling course and you do a lot of homeschool content on your YouTube channel and Instagram. I'm sure you get it too. And I have to be honest, I've been homeschooling the entire time and I have a 14-year-old and I still don't really feel like I have a good grasp on curriculums. Okay, so people want to know some guidance on finding the perfect curriculum. That's the first question.
So much like you, I mean, I've been homeschooling for a long time, and I have tried many a curriculum. I think over the years I've learned the first thing you need to understand is what is your teaching style and what is your child's learning style. Because if you choose a curriculum that doesn't fit those well, it's going to just be constant headbutting between you and the curriculum. You're not going to like it, or your kid's not going to like it. And it will only make your days harder and will only make you feel like a failure when you're not and your kid's not. It's just, likely that you're just using the wrong curriculum. So it's important to understand those things. Again, I promise I'm not trying to be like a sales plug for my course, because you can find these things online as well if you search for them. Teaching style quiz, as well as a learning style quizzes for your kids that you answer questions for about your child, and to really understand those and then allow those to inform the different types of curriculum that you start to look at as you're wanting to narrow it down. It's a beautiful thing because homeschooling curriculum has come such a long way. There's so many options now. When I was homeschooled back in, I don't know, like the 80s, I remember driving with my mom in a car up to the mountains of like North Carolina to this little Christian store that sold homeschooling curriculum. And there was like 5 curriculum options, and that was it. And now the options are kind of endless, honestly. But yeah, you've got to know how you teach. And again, I use that term loosely because I really believe that like as homeschool moms, we're really more guides in the beginning. We are teaching, but beyond that, we become more of like a guide rather than a
Yeah.
teacher. And also, how does your child learn? And then you can kind of narrow down the different curriculums from there.
Yeah. I have a few things to touch on. One with the guide thing. I was just going to point this out that with my older kids, I make them do a lot of things that are like mom jobs beyond school. Like, for example, there's a homeschool talent show in our area and they wanted to do it so bad. And I'm like, okay, then you need to go on there, print off the form, figure out like what's required of us. I made her like, fill out the whole thing, the envelope. Like, that sounds like a lot of work. I mean, I'm obviously going to be the one like bringing them, and we just got done doing a practice for it and everything. But like, I try to make them do even that kind of stuff, like figure out how to print off the form, read the instructions. What do we owe? What all information do we have to write down? Like, I try to push that off on them a lot because I do want to guide them even into, okay, you want to do this, then you need to figure out what you need to do. I know that doesn't seem like a big thing, but there are a lot of little things like that like moms just handle. And I do try to guide them to do that themselves, like there's so many opportunities like that.
Yep, I totally agree. And I think, like you said, it seems like a little thing, but it's not. And here's how I reframe these things in my mind. These are competency things. I want my children to be competent. And that means that you are capable of seeing something through from the idea phase to wherever, you want the end to be, showing up at the talent show, that they understand everything it takes to get from here to there. Because as moms, we want to do things. And actually, we say as moms, but like my husband is actually the one that is super guilty of this. I love him to pieces, but he's the one that's real guilty of this. That is, it's easier if I do it. That is what he says all the time. Sure, it is. You could print off that form. You could fill it out. All the, but then your kids think that they just think up an idea and then poof, it's there, and they don't recognize or appreciate everything that it takes to get that to that place. And then when they leave your home and they're like, hey, I want to do this. I want to fill out this job application. I want to do this thing. They've got to know how to do that. And this current generation, back again in my day, filling out applications, physically going into a place you wanted to work, getting an application, filling it out, taking it back, talking to people, handing it to them face to face, coming back in there's like so many steps that, modernity and as technology increases that get kind of obscured, that kids don't have to kind of go through some of those like fires and trials that we did, that you're like, okay, how can I put my kid through at least a little bit of like the awkward gauntlet and like all these different steps that you might have to do? Because I'm telling you, when you go out in public and you interact with some young folks who haven't been through these things, it's pretty apparent, right? It's pretty obvious that the competency isn't there. And that's it, because I don't expect every one of my children to be geniuses.
Right.
In fact, I think that genius intellect is sometimes debilitating towards happiness in life.
They're not all going to be. They're just not. No matter how good of a teacher you are, that's kind of natural,
Yep. They're not all going to be geniuses. And again, I don't really care if you are or not. I just want you to be competent in making choices for your life that you can live with, and that will help you succeed in life, to take care of yourself and your family and be good to those around you, and not sort of through laziness become a burden.
Right. Yeah. And so many times kids will get an idea and then I'm like, well, what do you, they're like, well, can we do this? And I'm like, what do you think you got to do next? And then they'll ask me questions. I'm like, what does it say? Why don't you try to Google that question? I'm so many times like, it might come off as I just don't have time to do this, but really I'm like, no, you can figure this out yourself. And so I'm going to allow you to do that. And obviously I'll step in if they go wrong with it. But there's just so many things that I'm like, yeah, that's possible. Why don't you just try, let me know what you need, like add it to the Amazon cart and I'll look it over and see if we can, get that. But I make them, like if they have an idea for something, I make them go into Amazon, add the items that we need for it, or Walmart or whatever it is, to the cart. Obviously I don't tell them to check out because I need to make sure it's like not, it's in budget and whatnot. But like there's so many examples like that. We're gonna make this thing. I'm like, okay, I guess you need to like Google it and then go on to Amazon and figure out the supplies, and we'll see what it, if it's too expensive. But yeah, I'm gonna make you like think through that completely, 100% from start to finish.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. They've got to learn through those trials and errors. We can't always protect them and save them from the mistakes that they're going to make, but they've got to like figure that stuff out in the real world, in a very physical sense in the real world. Like it can't all be, a concept that they're just, sitting there thinking about, philosophy class or whatever. That's great.
Yeah.
But they've got to have like tangible hands-on failures so that they can figure out like what can be, tricked or gamed and what can't. And that's always my thing with my kids is like, I want you to do things that I know that you can't use any of your personality skills or anything like that to like trick or game. This is just a simple, like, if you don't build this table correctly, it will fall down.
Right.
Right. Like
Yeah.
if you don't, baking is a great one. That is a science, not an art, right? If you don't use the exact amount of proper ingredients, this is not going to work. It's going to either blow up over the sides of the pan or it's going to burn, or, you have to have the right amount of ingredients, with baking things. It's not just like a dash of this and a dash of that and see what happens. I mean, some things are a little more forgiving than others, but, kids have to learn that like my daughters love to bake and I will try to help them, but if they weren't paying attention and they put in a quarter cup of something that was supposed to be a quarter teaspoon, they get all the way done and they're like, this tastes like garbage. I'm like, yep, that's what happens when you don't pay attention.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have one that tends to like, I think the natural, what she wants to do is like get every detail. And so with everything, she'll have a question. And I'm like, I don't know. I just can't. I'm going to not answer that because I need you to try to figure this out without getting every last detail from me first. And so I think that is what's so cool when you're around your kids so much is you can find those maybe like an otherwise strong kid, like maybe some weak points that you can hopefully, work through with them naturally by helping them to like with the cooking example. I have another one who doesn't care about details at all. And there have been some natural baking consequences of that personality trait that she also has to learn.
Well, and what you just said, I think is so important because when you have a child who is a bit of a perfectionist and very detail oriented, in the safety of home, in the safety of love and mom and family, they have to fail. They have to, because it will cripple them with anxiety later if they never do anything that they're not 100% certain of. Like they've got to know that failure isn't the end and that they're going to survive past it. Because some kids get really, especially very perfectionist type A kids, if they don't get an A+++, they're like, what has happened?
Yeah.
My whole life is over. And that can create sort of a sort of neuroticism in adulthood that can be very difficult to manage, and can lead to like just life failure because they have a failure to start, right? A fear to try anything because of a fear of failure. So I always think like it's got so important for those very perfectionist kids to learn that like they can survive making a mistake. It's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely what I'm talking about with this particular kid. And she tries because of, I mean, there's a lot of things that she tries that she does really well. But then there have been things where like she really thought she'd win first place on this certain thing and then she didn't. And, as a mom, it's always kind of like you put a lot of effort into that, but it's good. Like that is all good. And I'm actually really happy for situations like that we can put our kids into where they put their best effort forward and they still don't win, It's
Yep.
okay.
Yep. And I don't want to like out my sister here. I know she'd be totally fine with me talking about this, but this is like the story of her as a kid and me as a kid is she was just an intelligent, bright, very smart, never made a mistake, teacher's pet. And when she got to middle school and things got harder and she started to not get straight A's naturally on everything, she kind of just like gave up because she had never experienced any of that failure and it was crippling to her. Whereas I was always like, I don't know, probably like eating my boogers and running around doing whatever. So I was so used to failure that to me, for a long time, I went in with an expectation of failure, but I also like, I never walked into a room and thought I'm the smartest kid in this room. I always knew I wasn't going to be. So I was okay to try things and fail at things because I knew what that felt like. I was like, we'll see what will happen. Maybe this will go well. Maybe it won't. And both of those things were not great for us in the end. We both had to work through our own issues with what we thought about ourselves and our intelligence. But, she would tell you 100% that kind of like intelligence and not knowing how to deal with it when it doesn't come naturally or easy, or when you don't win and you're not perfect, that can be very difficult to deal with. And it's better the younger to just get it out of the way.
Right. Yeah. Those personalities sound so much like my two daughters. And then they also sound like me and my sister. So do your two girls have like a similar dynamic?
Yes and no. Theirs is expressed a little bit differently. It's not quite as like in your face as my sister and I were, but we definitely deal with, one of them like kind of just, it almost comes across as like a little bit like apathetic or like, just like, well, whatever. Because if she doesn't know she's going to be great at it, then she doesn't even want to try.
Okay.
And I can't, I'm like, absolutely not. You get your butt out there and you fail at that and you fail hard and you will come to appreciate, because it's just, there's such character building in that. And it's just, I see so much value in some of the really hard lessons that I went through and dumb things I did. And I want my kids to have those same experiences. I want them to do dumb things in a safe way in my home where mom is still here to and make sure that this isn't detrimental to you. This isn't, you're not going to die from this.
Right.
But it's tough lessons that you don't want the first time they experience that to be once they've left the nest,
Yep. I think that there's so much value in that. And you can see it as a mom. Like you can see all of these dynamics that other people just can't see, even people who are fairly close. It's almost like you have to be that close to really see it. I want to take a break from this episode to tell you about this month's sponsor, Toops & Co. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast a while, you've definitely heard of Toops & Co. I actually have recently sold my mom and my two sisters on Toops & Co. makeup. We were on a girls trip and we were sitting in the hotel room talking about our makeup, and they were on their phones quickly ordering it because I love it. I love it because it not only is natural and uses quality ingredients like grass-fed tallow and oils and things that you recognize and nothing that you don't, and that's really bad for your skin and bad for your health. It can go into your skin, which is your body's largest organ, and actually affect your health whenever you're not using natural things. But not only that, it actually works. So I just had to update my foundation for my winter skin. I have to always get like a darker shade in the summer. And I also got the Toops & Co. mascara. I hadn't tried that yet. I have their bronzer, their highlighter. I have like their whole line of makeup now. I keep adding to it. I really love the primer that goes underneath the foundation. And of course, the skincare, especially right now in the winter, my skin needs the extra hydration. And so I've been loving their tallow balm and their oil cleanser, the sea buckthorn oil cleanser. It also moisturizes and cleanses. I can't say enough good things about the company and their products. So they're made in America by a small company. I'm actually now friends with the owner as well. And just a genuinely awesome company that you can feel great about supporting, and also the products are amazing. So head on over to toopsandco.com to check out their organic skincare. Whether you're in need of moisturizers, cleansers, or their makeup, you can use the code FARMHOUSE to get a discount over at toopsandco.com. I know we branched pretty far from curriculum because I feel like all this life stuff is just like the reason we do it. No, it was me. I was the one who was like, speaking of guidance, that's right. Okay, but the other thought I had during that was you were talking about like butting heads on certain curriculums. And do you feel like there's a way to not butt heads on certain things like math? If the child hates math, like are there certain curriculums that don't make that happen? Asking for a friend.
Okay, so this is the part where I become wildly unpopular in the homeschooling community, is to say that over the years, my philosophy on homeschooling and everything has changed greatly because I've seen the changes in my kids and how, just the things that we value as education and where does that really where does that fit, right? I think as a society, we value things like rote memorization of math skills, that we all know that we have this little phone in our pocket, and most of us don't do a lot of math in our heads on the everyday. So
That's true.
I have chosen to calibrate my expectations with things like math and come to recognize that, this world could use a lot more emotionally intelligent people who understand their own emotions and feelings, and they don't again, ruin the lives of those around them because they don't understand themselves and why they're being a certain way. So I've come to value making sure that my kids are emotionally intelligent people who are capable of existing in the world and not driving those around them nuts, right? Like being productive citizens and not just again, laying around all the time thinking about problems and woe is me all the time and stuff like that. I want my kids to be doers. Listen, I love philosophy, by the way. I absolutely love it. So I feel like I've said a few things that have made it seem like I don't. I love it. My kids are studying it. We talk about stoicism, all that. I love it. But as someone I know that went to college, got a philosophy degree, said when she graduated, she quickly realized that the philosophizing company wasn't hiring. So most of us don't get to
that.
sit around.
The philosophizing guy doesn't have a whole lot of jobs for you.
Right. Exactly. So that's not necessarily a paid job. But my point in saying all of that is to say that I think that we need to ease up a bit. I don't know the age for this person who shall not be named, who might be questioning this. I don't know the age of said child, but here's what I'll tell you is that there's a lot of research out there. There's particularly a math professor from Stanford, and my brain is slipping on her name, but she wrote a curriculum called Mindset Mathematics. There's a really fascinating podcast interview with her where she talks about the theory of maths, because that's apparently the technically correct term is maths with an S on the end.
Maths. Okay.
Didn't know that until I watched that podcast.
Mathematics.
But
that makes sense.
She basically explains that this idea that we expect children to just memorize things from a super early age with math, think about how many people say that they don't like math or they're not good at math. That is a very common thing that we hear, and that we hear it a lot from women more than men. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why is that? Well, sure, it could be that something about, men versus women means that men are naturally better at math, perhaps, or something. I'm going to probably get roasted for saying that, but I don't necessarily think that's it.
I mean, it's not for us, which is so weird. I'm definitely the more natural math person, but whatever.
But so this is what I'm saying is I actually don't know that I think that it's a gender-based thing. As much as it is, mathematics becomes kind of more of an applied thing for boys who are trying to figure out how to tinker with this thing or do this thing and make it work, that more engineering mind. It becomes more applicable to them, whereas women typically have more of, they have a more caring caregiver type mindset. We're thinking in a different way, often, not always, but often. And so if we're being told at third grade to just memorize, and it's of no value to you, you have no, there's nothing intrinsically in it that says, I need to know this. It's just memorization for memorization's sake. It's retained long enough to pass the test, and then it's forgotten. Again, how many times when you talk to homeschooling moms or moms who are interested in homeschooling, do you hear them say, "Oh, I can't homeschool my kids because
I don't know
I
math.
don't know. I can't help my third grader with their math now." Well then why?
Why do you
I
think it's
say this
important? You're
with
like
all the
35 and
love,
successful at something. Like, what?
but also, why are you putting your kid back into the same
In
system
the
that
same,
failed you?
I've always said
I
that.
don't I don't
Yeah.
understand. And I'm
Yep.
not saying that you can't or whatever, but don't use the reason that you could never homeschool your kids because you don't remember fourth grade math in the same breath if you
Yeah.
are, you're like, but you're trusting the same system to educate your child. No, because they're going to
Right.
teach them long enough to remember to pass the test, and then it's gone because it hasn't made enough connections in your brain to stay, because it doesn't have a value to the child yet, which is why this professor teaches this whole mindset mathematics. So instead of teaching the whole year about one math concept, a whole year about algebra, ugh, right? It's taking like larger math concepts and teaching them throughout the year in different ways that are like applied so that they have some kind of tangible sense to the child.
Yeah.
And so, with that said, also, as I have been teaching my kids math, I have been relearning math myself because I was terrible at math in school. And I thought that I was just bad at math until I started redoing it with my kids, because I thought, well, I can't help them with this if I don't learn it. So I basically was sort of like pseudo taking their math classes with them, and discovered that I actually really enjoyed it. My kids have come out here into my cabin before and found me doing, I'm ashamed to say this, algebra worksheets by myself for fun. Like, I would print them algebra worksheets for them to do for like practice, and I would print an extra one for myself to do it, because I found that oh wow, when I'm learning this now, when I care to learn it, I want to learn it. Now it makes sense and I can retain it. So,
Yeah.
I would say if kids are really struggling with math, the ones in the younger years, just try. I mean, even this Stanford professor, this isn't just me, it's the Stanford professor says very, very basics until middle school. Just,
okay. Yeah.
Your third grader does not have to memorize multiplication facts. If they are so inclined, if they are interested, follow the interest.
Right.
But
yes,
you can kind of hit pause until you get to, and by the way, you could do that with a lot of topics like science and history as well. Wait till you get to middle school to really drill down on these things, because the truth is they're not going to remember it from before.
No.
You typically have to learn something 3 times to retain it for the long term. So especially if you're learning it when you are 6, 8, and 9 or whatever, right? But as far as actual curriculums go, there are 3 that I really like for people who are not naturally or don't feel naturally inclined to math, or their children don't feel naturally inclined to math. There's one that is a series of books called Learn Math Fast. You can buy them on Amazon. There's, I want to say, like 5 different volumes.
Okay.
They are meant for anybody who wants to sharpen their math skills. Maybe you're an adult who doesn't remember anything. You could do these books. Or if you've got a kid who is just behind and needs to kind of relearn some things, and there's actually a great little test in the beginning that they ask you to ask the child to answer this math question. And if it takes them more than a couple seconds to answer it, then you know that they need to essentially start from the beginning of this curriculum, because essentially they've been, the foundation of how they understand math isn't good. So they need to start back at the beginning. But Learn Math Fast is great. Once you get into like middle school, high school, Shoreman Math, I think, is fantastic if you have a kid that is college bound. If your kid is wanting to go to college and you're wanting them to go to college, Shoreman Math, I think, does a very good and thorough job. You can have physical books and stuff, but it's online classes that you can watch the videos and self-paced and stuff, but very good job of explaining concepts and making it easier. And one of the newer ones that we have just started using with one of my kids is called Denison Algebra. This curriculum has 2 different volumes, if you will, 2 different, I guess, I mean, it's technically both algebra, but one is for I don't know that he actually says like for special needs kids, but just for kids who really, really are struggling with algebra, who really need it broken down, very, very basic. And then one is like, both of them are meant for kids who don't love math and who are not naturally inclined to it and need the wins, right? Kids need the wins along the way. And if every lesson feels like I'm a moron, I can't do it, then they just never build the confidence to keep going. Right. And I'm really pleased with the dentist in algebra right now. Really pleased with it. So those are kind of my recommendations for struggling math. And I have a lot of input on that. Ask me how, because math, I feel like it's a tough one.
Well, and what's funny is we were talking about the applied thing. I personally understand math. Like I've always liked it, but I've also like had an inclinations toward like certain, I guess, like businessy things and whatnot. So whenever I'm sitting down doing Abeka math with this child, I am constantly pulling her out of the book and being like if she has to find like 27% of this certain number and she's like, let's say it's 27% of 150. And then she'll say like, 612. I'm like, okay, if I said I'm going to give you 27% of $150, would you expect me to give you 600? No. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is like get you out of this random little book and into the real world, because I know that you understand what 27% of $150 is. Like if I gave you that, you'd probably run some quick math. Like it's about a third. You'd expect $50 from me, right? Like, yes. Well, then why did you think the answer would be 600? Well, because it's so random. What's the point of this? And she even articulated it to me kind of how you said, like, well, she's probably, or you didn't say she, but whatever. This is a she. So you guys now know who this is. But she's like, what's the point of this? I could be like playing with Theo or making lunch. And I'm like, but you have to learn your math. But she's like, this doesn't make sense because I could be doing so many more productive things right now. And I'm like, yeah, but you also have to learn your math. So it's just funny because it's like she can articulate what's the point of this. And I'm like trying to pull her out of this stupid Abeka book into the real world. I'm like, well, how could 27% of 150 be 600? That's not right. But she just like starts plugging numbers in and they feel very random to her and not applicable in any way. And so she just like, well, sure, it's 600 because I plugged it in and I got that,
Listen, this is exactly what this Learn Math Fast. In fact, that exact example you used when he talks about percentages, he talks about money. He talks about thinking about numbers as money is one of the categories to think of them as. And it's exactly that. Like if your brain feels discombobulated with these numbers, stop and think about 100% as $1. And, the way he explains it, it really does take it off the page and right into like, oh, okay. Because the truth is that, yeah, she could be doing something else, but that is helpful because if you go to the store and this shirt you want to buy says 30% off, you want to be able to do that math pretty quickly in your head to figure out how much this item is going to cost. And yeah, you could pull out your phone, but it's easier and faster to do it in your head. Yeah, really quickly. So with baking, I mean, it doesn't surprise me at all that you are good at math naturally. There's a lot of things that you do that I could see exactly why those things go hand in hand. And I've had to learn those because like as I'm doing like DIY projects and building, honest to God, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I will just shame myself for the sake of the listener who might feel the same way, is that when you gave me a measuring tape and it was like the fourth little tick, I was like, I don't know. It's like four little ticks. Yeah. And my husband was like, that's not a measurement.
I do that too, actually, though. Yeah.
But it was like, I kind of had to finally go, okay, I need to know this because again, building something is just like baking something. You can't, if it's a quarter of an inch off, the darn thing is not going to stay together. It's not going to hold up. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not going to work. Exactly. So there's definitely, to me, that is real life applied math. That's where I have my kids help and do things and take measurements. And then they get to see around the farm as we're putting up fencing and we're spacing boards or we're putting something on the wall or whatever. Like, this is why this stuff matters. The bridges you drive across every day, those kind of things. If math wasn't valuable, we would be floating in the Savannah River instead of driving across this bridge. So somebody needs
Yeah.
to know math.
Well, in this particular child, my point is that I know she does get the numbers. Like I know from experience that she would understand that in the real world, but like when it's on this page, to her it suddenly is meaningless and she can't like grasp it. And so I have to like bring it back to something that she understands. Like if we're doing like pints and quarts, I'm like, now if I said this took a pint, would you expect to, well, no. But you understand it in the real life. But whenever I go and put it on this worksheet, it just like loses all meaning to you. And so I'm like, maybe we just need to get out of Abeka for this particular child. Cause I just think it's just not working out. It's just annoying.
I've never used Abeka, but I do know that a lot of people who've got kids that think differently, that's been like the one curriculum I've heard to like avoid for kids who need to, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's like when you're a kinesthetic learner and you need something tangible, then it's like, well, yeah, you could just pull those things out physically and say, okay, well, then answer the question physically here. And I'll check it that you got it right, as long as you don't have to read it. Yeah, then just, you know, physically. But again, I also understand that we struggle with like, but we need them to be able to take tests for certain things.
Right.
And again, if they're a college bound, that to me is always where like, if this is a college bound kid, then you do have to follow more of the norms in order for them to be able to take entrance exams and stuff like that. But I also feel like a lot of that can be, you know, sharpened up in high school, those last couple years in high school, and just not killing their love of learning and before they get to the really hard stuff, right? Like when the stuff is supposed to be pretty like lightweight, easy, fun, I don't want to just completely snuff out your love of learning before you've had to learn about like the hard stuff where you're like, oh my God, forget it. I'm a moron and I will never understand
I'll never
this.
get
Like,
this.
I don't want them to go into the hard stuff with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always telling this particular child that I'm like, you really do get these numbers. It's just whenever we're doing this that suddenly you don't. And so I'm trying to like have one foot in the I'm not going to destroy all of her confidence in math and the other foot in like, but we have to get this. And I'm like, why am I like beating my head against a wall on this? Like I know my homeschool philosophy and this does not fit into it. I know that. But there's certain things that, you know, you just start to buy into.
I'm not being the mom I want to be when you're doing this. Yeah. I always hate it when my kids don't let me be the kind of mom that I want to be. I'm like, it's all your fault. I was such a nice mom in my head.
Before, you know, all the actual hard stuff happens, which I know that we're not even there with, you know, like in life, as moms say, like, oh yeah, you think this is hard. Wait till they move out, or, you know, they're driving at 10 o'clock at night because they're 25 and they can do whatever they want and they don't text you when they get home. Like, you know, that kind of stuff. Well, that should be fun. Did you make a New Year's goal this year of cooking more from scratch? Maybe going around the exterior parts of the grocery store, focusing on whole grains, meats, dairies, vegetables, in order to make your meals more simple and learn those from scratch techniques. Maybe you even want to start buying your grains in bulk. Something that has been a game changer for us in our family is milling our own grains. When you mill grains from scratch, you get the most nutrients out of the grain as they start to break down very quickly after they are ground into flour. Milling at home means that you can buy grains in bulk so that you can buy large quantities and have a food storage. And for your health, I love using whole grains in my recipes. Sometimes I don't always do them all whole, but mixing in a little bit of whole grains gives it color, flavor, and of course, nutrition. Our favorite mill in the farmhouse is our mock mill. It works beautifully and it looks so lovely on the countertop. It's beautiful in bamboo and it sits out, and I can quickly and easily make flour for our recipes. You can get 5% off the mock mill by visiting bit.ly/farmhouse mock mill. That brings you to my website where you can click the link. The reason you have to do that is that's how they track you for the discount. So there isn't actually a coupon code, but whenever you go to checkout, that is where you will see the 5% discount. They had a lot of coupon scraping sites that were making it to where people were getting the discount that didn't have a link. So again, go to bit.ly/farmhouse mock mill. That is where you can click the link and get 5% off and check out the mock mill that we love so much in our kitchen. Okay, before I let you go, I have a few homeschool philosophy questions. So one would be, were you nervous or scared to start homeschooling? And then ultimately, what made you decide to do it, even though maybe you were or weren't?
I was absolutely terrified to start homeschooling. I was not. I was scared too. As somebody who was homeschooled on and off, I was terrified to homeschool because I felt like I wasn't smart enough.
Yeah.
And then my ultimate reason for wanting to do it was basically exactly what I said earlier, was that I struggled a lot in early education, and my mom ended up pulling me out to homeschool me, and come to find out I wasn't a moron. I just needed the information in a different way.
Right. Yeah.
However, the damage that did to my psyche as a little kid, believing that I was just stupid, it became something that took me 30 plus years to get over and to shake and to see beyond, and to not feel like I was always having to prove something to myself or to other people. And I didn't want that for my kids. I didn't want my kids to learn. I didn't want my kids to hate reading, because I hated reading as a kid. I love reading now. I read, 50, 60 books a year. I tried. I mean, my goal is always 100. I never make it there, but I read a ton of books. And I wanted my kids to love it too, and not hate it. I didn't want the school system to beat the love of learning out of them, not always intentionally, but just by nature of not being able to be individualistic in the way that sometimes is necessary, not to snuff that love out for kids. So that to me was more like that weighed heavier for me and more than my fear in the beginning. It let me at least get started.
Yeah. Yep. I don't remember how fearful I was of it, but I do know that some homeschool kids, that grass is greener on the other side. Sometimes they think, well, maybe I struggle in this certain school area because I was homeschooled. And the kids who went to school maybe know that that's not the case. And so you have that insight that, for me, in my mind, made me a little bit more confident to homeschool. But yeah, I guess the encouragement is people who do feel scared. You stepped out, did it anyways, and now you have some kid, you're still in the thick of it in most ways possible, but you do still have some kids on the other side that you can be like, okay, we actually got through most of this so far. So,
and the other thing is that people will say things to you that you have to learn to block out. It's one of my biggest pet peeves these days. Is like, if you have a quiet child or a shy child, again, people will chalk that kind of stuff up to being homeschooled, right? Well, like, oh, your kid just might be like a weird homeschooler,
right?
And they need to get out more. And it's like, but there's quiet and shy kids in public school as well.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that, that your kid is going to be whatever it is their personality type and stuff is going to be. And just because your kid is homeschooled doesn't mean they have to be a genius. I think there's a pressure that every homeschool child should appear like some prodigy because they're homeschooled in order to, as like this defense of homeschooling, that if you're going to make this just wild decision to homeschool your kids, then your kid should have to prove that it was the right decision by their great intellect that just blows everyone else out of the water. And listen, I have books up here about families that have these kids that are like in medical school at Harvard at 13.
Yeah,
or
like
whatever,
that does happen.
That happens for sure. But is that your goal? Is that what you're trying to do? Is to raise a prodigy?
Not mine.
Maybe homeschooling isn't right if that's the only thing that you care about. But for most of us, it's not. And you have to block out the noise of that stuff and understand that people are often uncomfortable with things that they don't understand and don't have any experience with. And for a lot of people, your decision to homeschool feels like an indictment on their decision not to. And you can't let that attitude, they're going to have they can have a natural attitude of like, needing to defend their decision not to homeschool their kids in ways that that will often appear as though it's an attack on your decision to homeschool, or looking for some kind of proof that you're worthy of being able to homeschool your kids, or that your kids are prodigies or geniuses because of it. And that's not the goal with homeschooling. So if the sooner that you can get out of that, not fall into that trap to begin with, but if you're in it, get out of it, the sooner you can do that, the more peaceful, smooth, and just smooth sailing your homeschooling journey will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because you're going to get it no matter what, even if your kids appear successful, and it's still going to be something people do. So, okay, tell us about your course and the best place to follow up and find you for those who aren't already following along.
Yeah, so my homeschooling course is a 6-week self-paced course. I say this not as a sales pitch, but it's something that I poured my heart and soul into, wanted it to be really like A to Z. If you're completely new to homeschooling and totally unsure where to start, or maybe you've been homeschooling for 6 years and you're like, I feel like I'm doing this wrong. I don't feel like this is working how I wanted it to. I'm not happy. I don't feel like my kids are happy. And you just want to like reboot, reevaluation, kind of starting again from the ground up and making sure that it doesn't mean you have to change everything. You just might want to be evaluating things along the way. So that's what this course does over 6 weeks. There's 40 plus video lessons in them. I did them based off of outlines, so I don't like wax poetic in the videos like I do in interviews like this. It's much more concise, and there's a workbook and all of that. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students have taken it, and I've heard from first-time homeschoolers to former teachers to veteran homeschoolers, or varsity homeschool moms, as I like to call them, who have really found value in the course. So I'm very proud of it, and it's one of those things that I'm really happy with how much it's helped other people, and that was my goal with it. So that's available. You can go to my website, thisgatherednest.com. There's a little link at the top.
Okay.
It's called The Art of Home Education. But then otherwise, you can just find me on YouTube, my personal channel, Angela Braniff, our family channel, This Gathered Nest, and Instagram, This Gathered Nest. And those are kind of the only places. I avoid all the other places of the internet.
Can't find you on TikTok doing dances or anything?
Nope. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody wants to see that. I'm nearly 40 years old. Nobody wants to watch me dancing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was totally honored to be a guest.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast.